So on Memorial Day, it's, I don't know about you, but when I think of Memorial Day, like my tendency goes to think of like, do I need a mattress? This is mattress sale time. But it's also a hard day. I was driving yesterday with my kids to Hocking Hills, and so I had a lot of good time in the car with them. I've started to figure out, like, I don't know if it's worth that long a drive, but it was good. It was good. And while we were in the car, they noticed that there were all these American flags next to the cemeteries we were driving past. And I got to tell them like why they were there, because they don't know. You have to teach kids these things. So I was teaching them that, and I was able to tell them about my college roommate, Forrest, who was in ROTC and all that world, and he died in Iraq. And these days, for many of us, they just pass by really fast. But it's really, I think, important to remember those that have given up everything so that we could have the privileges and the freedoms that we do have. It's almost like God knew what he was doing, because this text today is about someone who decided that he was going to give up his life so that other people could be free. I mean, it's a crazy parallel that the best gift you could give the world to anyone is to give away yourself so that other people can live. And that's the text we'll read today. This is from Luke chapter 9, and we're continuing to preach all the way through the Gospel of Luke. We've been doing it now for like 18 years. I'm just joking, like 5 months. And it is going to speed up because we end at the end of summer. It is going to speed up. But today's text is a beautiful one, and I invite you to open your minds and your hearts to hear what God has to say. Jesus is with his disciples, and it says, once when Jesus was praying in private, and his disciples were with him, he asked them, who do the crowds say that I am? And they replied, well, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others that you're one of the prophets from long ago that's come back to life. Well, what about you, Jesus asked. Who do you say that I am? Well, Peter answered, you are the Christ, you're God's Messiah. Jesus strictly warned them not to tell anyone. And he said, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. And then he said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for me will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and lose and forfeit their very self? Whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them, and when he comes in glory, and in the glory of the Father and all the angels, truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the kingdom of God. Every time I read a text, there's like 1,000 directions it could go, but today we're going to focus on the main thing, which is that question, which is arguably the most important question that's ever been asked in the history of the world, which is, who do you say that I am? Jesus was the best question asker in the history of the world. And anytime he asks a question, your ears should perk up and you should get dialed in, because he asks your questions not for his benefit. He knows exactly who he is. Whenever Jesus asks a question, he asks it for your benefit. So he's asking, who do you say that I am? And this is a story about identity and about who Jesus is and about who you are. And that's what we're going to wrestle with this morning. I remember when Grace, my little daughter, was around 4 years old, so that would have meant Theo was 2. And one day we were just talking as a family, and Grace came up to us and she said, I know who you are. And of course I'm like, well, I'm interested to know who you think I am. I had a college professor one time where what they would do sometimes with their little kids is when they would be at the dinner table, they would all adjust their rotation so they would have to sit in someone else's spot. And when they would do that, you had to pretend to be the person whose seat you were in. So I would pretend like I'm Grace, and Theo would pretend like he's me. And he was a communications professor who was brilliant. And the reason why he did it is because he would get the kids basically to act out who they thought everybody was. And you can learn a lot about what they think about you when they're doing that. It's a good parent trick. That's a freebie for you. But our kids volunteered. They're like, I want to tell you who you are. And Grace goes, I know who you are. Dad is silly. And we're like, oh, that's right. Dad is silly. And then another time she goes, well, all right, so Dad is silly. And she goes, I'm goofy. I'm like, oh, Gracie, you're the goofy one in our family. And then we go, well, what's Theo? And she goes, well, Theo's fun. And then we go, well, what's Mom? And she goes, Mom's responsible. She's the one that like holds our whole family together. And so, goofy, silly, and fun, and then Mom making it all work, getting breakfast ready. You know what I mean? But what's funny is here she was just a little kid, and what she was doing in her mind was she was figuring out who everyone was, what their role was, what their value was to our family, and who their hearts represented. And even as little kids, everybody does this. When I show up here, one of the things that happens at a church with a lot of baby boomers is everyone sends me Facebook friend requests, right? And so all these Facebook friend requests roll in, and not only has your name, but it has your bio. And the most important part of your Facebook account is the first line, which tells me who you are. And it's interesting who you think you are. A lot of people put, obviously what comes after your name. Sometimes people will put, I'm a husband or a wife, or I'm a dad, or I'm a grandparent, right? Grandparents always put that right out there. They put whether or not, you can tell whether or not they're from right here or somewhere else in Ohio, because they put Buckeye, like right at the top. I don't know what you put, but like what's in your bio? Everyone from the very beginning, from they're born all the way up until they die, are trying to tell people who they are and what matters to them and all the details that other people need to know about them. And so Jesus turns to his disciples. He says, who do people say that I am? What should my bio be on my Twitter handle? Like who am I? And they kind of like search the internet real fast to get their answers. They're like, well, Jesus, these are the first 10 page results. This is who you are. You are maybe you're John the Baptist. You have to remember, by this point in the story, he'd already been killed by Herod, and so people thought that he had come back from the dead, like maybe Jesus was John the Baptist. Another person says, well, maybe you are Elijah. There were some traditions in Israel that whoever the Messiah was going to be would be Elijah coming back from the past to come and conquer things. And so there were rumors out there that maybe he was Elijah. Some other people were like, well, Jesus, it says here that maybe you were just another prophet that's come. So his disciples are basically like going down the list of all the possible identities that Jesus could have. Were any of those identities right? Did the crowds get his identity right? No. They didn't know who he was. They were guessing who he was. They were projecting a little bit about who he was, but it was all fake news, and none of it was right. And I love what Jesus does next. I like to picture, he goes, who do the crowd say that I am? And they give him all these answers. And then he kind of moves on fast because he cares very little about what the crowds think. He cares very little about the crowds think. And instead what he does is he turns to the people around him, because I think Jesus cares far more about their answer than the crowds. You should care far more about the people's opinion around you than the crowds. And what happens is he goes, well, who do you say that I am? Can you picture Jesus sitting in a room with you where he turns to you over coffee and he says, who do you think that I am? What answer would you give? Well, Peter, who was always the one who spoke first, he was like that disciple who couldn't stop himself from talking and always made mistakes and usually got the wrong answer. This time, surprisingly, he actually gets it right. He says, you are the Messiah. And that was the right answer. The other stories actually tell us it in different ways. And so, they fill in content in different places. But here's what he does, is he gets the words right, but he gets all the content wrong. So he doesn't understand what Messiah means. A Messiah in Jewish culture meant the anointed one. It was someone who had oil put on their head, who was the one who was going to come and lead everything in the right direction. Every 4 years in this country, we have a Messiah election, where everyone kind of thinks, if we can just elect the right person, then everything will be fixed, right? And the debt will go away and everyone will be happy, and it's a fight for messiahs. And so Peter was thinking very similar vibes. They thought the Messiah was someone who was going to come to Israel, and this person was going to be like a combination of their pastor, their president, everything in between. This person was going to be their leader who was going to kick the Romans out, who was going to be their spiritual force, who was going to bring peace to the land, and everyone could finally go, That's called shalom, the way things are supposed to be. Restore peace to the land. And so when Peter says, you're the Messiah, you know what he's saying? He goes, I want you, Jesus, to fulfill all my dreams, to fulfill all my expectations for getting everything right. Two of his other disciples in another story, what they do is they come to Jesus and they say, Jesus, when you become the Messiah, we have like this little request. Is it cool? Can one of us sit at your right hand and one of us sit at your left hand so that when you like are in charge of everything, we can be in your cabinet? You know, I want to be the defense secretary. Like, I'm just teasing, but you know what I mean? They're trying to position themselves to be leaders in this new kingdom where Jesus is going to rule Israel, kick out all the enemies, and make everything right. And they're all, I'm not going to lie, they're kind of excited about it. Because they're the ground floor disciples. These are the ones that were early investors in Jesus, and the return on that investment for leaving their families and wandering around with this knucklehead is going to turn out to be their greatest victory. That's their hope. That's their hope. They were like, they found Facebook when it was only like 25 cents. And Jesus says, you're right. I am the Messiah. You're on the right track. And then this is what he says next. But Jesus strictly warned them not to tell this to anyone. In other words, people weren't ready to really hear what Jesus was going to do. He said, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and must be killed and then on the third day raised to life. And Peter's scratching his head because he's like, well, hold on. Whoa. That doesn't match up to anything that I've heard about a Messiah. Jesus, you see, knew his identity. He knew what he was going to do and where he wanted to go, and it didn't match up well with what other people's expectations of him were. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about identity and how that matters and why that matters, because it's a messy thing to deal with. You know, when Jesus was wandering around, there were times where he would start making claims about who he was and that he was like God's son, for example. And every time he would tell people who he was, there would be resistance and stress among all of his followers. I'll give you a few examples. There was this time where he was baptized. And as he was baptized, God appeared up in the clouds and a dove descended and a voice came from heaven. Do you remember what the voice said at Jesus' baptism? This is my son, my beloved, with whom I'm well pleased. In other words, what God was doing at his baptism was he was telling us the identity of Jesus. This is my son. In other words, like when you have your Facebook page, this is the first line. So the first line for who Jesus is declared by God, and it could not be more clear. But you have to understand, everyone that's ever been baptized in the history of the world doesn't have that title. And so when God appeared and said that, they're like, yeah, that's weird. What do you mean he's your son? Jesus is special or he's different than everyone else? Like, how does that work? And there were times where Jesus would walk around and he would start teaching grandiose things. And the chief priests of the law and all the people that were in charge of the world, you know what they said? They said, well, like, where's his degrees? Like, we went to school. How come this guy didn't like get the union trade like certifications that he has? He should not be saying these things that he's doing. And there were a couple times, there's stories where one person's listening to Jesus as he's preaching, as he's talking. He turns to his neighbor and says, hold on, isn't this guy from Nazareth? Nazareth was like, picture a place in like Ohio that no one cares about that's like bad. I can't picture one, but you can. I've driven through some of them on the way to Hocking Hills. Where like there's like fireworks stands and no one's from there. It'd be like saying, well, hold on, you want to be president of the United States and you're from Chillicothe? Like, how does that work? They looked at Jesus and they're like, this guy's from Nazareth. They don't even have like a bank there. How could he be doing anything? And so they turn to Jesus and they go, this guy's from Nazareth. And they actually say this in the Gospels. Can anything good even come from a place like that? In other words, they were putting an identity on Jesus, telling him that he was worth nothing because he was from a certain place. And then there was another time where he was like teaching and preaching. And he's saying all these important things, and they're really true things, beautiful things. And the crowds are like listening to him. And along the way, they turn to one another and they go, hey, isn't this that carpenter's son? They actually said that about him. And they weren't saying like, oh man, like this is a good carpenter. They were saying, isn't this a poor kid? Doesn't he come from those poor parents that don't have any money, from that town that doesn't matter? Like, how could he be standing here telling us what to think? And what they were doing was they were trying to take someone who had an identity that was here and make him feel like this because they didn't want to hear what he had to say. And they were placing on Jesus an identity that did not fit him. They were giving him clothes that were too tight. And his identity was so much bigger than that. And everywhere Jesus went, he would say, "Who do you say that I am? Who do you think that I am?" And the irony of it is they'd already told him in chapter 1 who he was. But they couldn't get there because they couldn't dream big enough and they couldn't see far enough to know that his identity was the child, the Son of God, who was the Messiah that was coming to die for everyone and set everything right. His identity was like, whoo! And they couldn't get there. Because there was an identity problem that people were having. They were trying to put him in a really, really tiny box. And I just want to pause to say this. We all have identities. I'm the silly one, or the goofy one, or the responsible one. And Jesus knows what it's like to be told that he doesn't matter, and that he's not from the right place, and that he's not good enough. And if you ever walk into a room and feel like you have to prove yourself because you maybe don't have the degrees, or maybe your background isn't the way that you want it to be, or you maybe failed in business, or you've been divorced, or you've been through drug addictions or jail, or I don't know what it is, but if you've ever had an identity placed on you that you carry around with shame and you can't even write it in the bio, you should know that Jesus knows what it's like to walk into rooms and be told that he doesn't belong. And he goes, "Who do you say that I am?" You know, in our culture, one of the hardest things that I think people struggle with is finding their identity, because in our culture, the way it works is your identity is how you find your value and your self-worth. And our teenagers go through this as much as anyone goes through this. So when you're a teenager, what you're doing is you're trying on different things to see who you are all the time. And so I've got my little kids, and like Grace, I'm always trying to pump her up. We explore different things. You always try every sport because you don't know which one they're going to like and which one they're going to be, right? And of course, as a very bad dad, what I try to do is make him into who I want him to be. But the truth is his identity is going to come out whether I push it or not. And so I try to be like, well, maybe you're our dancer, Grace. Maybe you're our artist. Maybe you're our swimmer. Like, she's got all these things that she's trying on to find her value and her identity and her worth. And so she's like, well, I was born in Miami, Florida. When I have to say Miami, Florida here, because you guys have Miami, Ohio. It's so confusing. You know, like, people have their identities for where they're from. When I got here, you should know, it was tricky to come here not from Ohio because of how important being from Ohio is an important part of people's identity. They wear it like so proud. So I'm from Seattle. It doesn't ring the same, right? We all have all these different identities that we carry around. So one of the things that I'm most proud of when people ask me, "Chris, who are you?" What I do, the very first thing that I do is I go, well, let me show you a picture of my family. My identity, so much of it is wrapped up in my family. So I like whip out, here they are, here's our little Christmas photo, right? And I take so much pride in telling people not only just who I am, but like, these are the people I live with. Another part is like, I'm a pastor. Man, I feel so important. Just teasing. Not true. Well, like, my identity is so wrapped up in my work, in my family, where I'm from, who I cheer for. We live in a world where my identity, so much of it, is wrapped up in the brands of clothes that we wear. So one of the ways that we tell people who we are and if we're valuable or not is, well, like, depends on like, well, where do you shop, right? Did you know that it's the greatest pride of every 13-year-old girl right now if you're wearing a Lululemon purse around your shoulders? You know you've made it in life as a 13-year-old if. We know that as a 40-year-old mom, if those Tory Burch shoes are shiny enough, then your identity is secure. You know what I mean? We all play around with identities, and we all have them. So many of us, our identity is our job. Like, I am a lawyer. I am a farmer. There's like 2 of you left. I am a banker. I am this. You should know that because of how wrapped up in our culture our identities and our work can be, one of the rules I have as a pastor is when I meet you, I'll never ask you what you do until you tell me. Because I never want to pretend like you're valuable to me if you have a good job. Our identities are something that we're always searching for. One of the things that's been interesting to see is tattoos. We live in a culture where everyone's getting tattoos all the time because what they're really doing is trying to tell you who they are by putting ink on their bodies. There's nothing wrong with that. But like when you see someone with an Iron Man tattoo, what they're trying to tell the world is, this is who I am, this is what I value, I've made it. You know what I mean? And we've got those people that are here. And I'm so jealous of them because they're fit and I'm close. I'm close. Every day we carry around identities that we've chosen. We carry around identities that we didn't choose, like our genders and our nationalities. We carry around our identities of what we think we like. So many, I love walking around Powell. You just see everyone with sweatshirts on that's like #mom vibes, walking around with their Stanley Cup. I've chosen my identity and I'm going to wear it so that everyone knows who I am and I have value when I do this. For our boomers out there, your identity is I'm a golfer and I look good when I wear the right brands. And we all do this. Our car is our identity. If you drive around this car, that means this about you. If you drive this car, this means this about you. And I'm not even going to go down the list of telling you what those reputations are, but you know them. This is our life. Everything is about finding our identities and who we are. And the good news of the gospel is that we have a God, when everyone tried to give him the wrong identity, or tried to tell him that the identities that he had didn't matter, what he did is when he said, who do you think that I am? He wasn't asking that because he didn't know. He knew exactly who he was. And did you know that every time we do a baptism here, and especially for little ones, and I made a mistake about 4 months ago where we preached on John the Baptist because we're going through this, and I said, anyone that wants to get baptized here, just let us know. We've had too many baptisms here over the last season. We do the 9 a.m., last week was there 2? I don't even, lost track. It's all good. But when we baptize the little ones, do you know what we're doing? Unlike a Catholic church, we don't think that we're now cleansing them of sin and they were going to hell and now they aren't going to hell. There's some traditions that say that. That's not what we think baptism is. What we're doing when we baptize, I don't know if you've caught this, is we say, I baptize you in the name of the Father, in the name of the Son, and in the name of the Holy Spirit. You are now a what? You're a child of God. What we've done is we've given them their identity so that whenever they do their bio for the rest of their life, and whatever other people try to tell them who they are, for the rest of the life, no longer does it matter who they are, it matters whose they are. And that for the rest of their life, wherever they go, whether they make it in business or not, whether their marriages go great or crash or fail, whether their kids are beautiful or are born with all kinds of trouble, it doesn't matter. Anything that happens, because your identity for the rest of your life is secure, is real. And I was on the pathway this last week because I was just walking around. Sometimes as a pastor, one of my greatest privileges is at least in the post-pandemic world, no one walks to the offices anymore. I don't know if you know that. It's kind of quiet. And that's okay. And so I just walked around. And I like walking on the pathway because what will happen is on the stones where people are buried and on gravestones, do you know what those are? People are writing down what they think their identities are. Did you know that? And so on your stone are a list of words, and often it'll have your dates. So that's a part of your identity, where you lived and and what days you were alive. Often, the next line will be, do you know what comes next is who their spouses were or kids. That's a big part of it. There's a lot of them out there that actually surprise me. It just says, child of God. On your tombstone, you're going to write your identity, and I guarantee you it's not going to be your resume. Think of how sad that would be. that if on your tombstone you just wrote down your accomplishments? Did you know that's what pharaohs used to do? And the kings and queens of the world, when you go to like these ancient museums and you're in the Louvre and you're reading through this like stone tablet of who this person was, their greatest privilege in life was to write down all the nations they conquered and all the things that they did. It was another way of saying, like, can you imagine how sad it would be if on your tombstone you wrote down what your 401k status was? If you walked past that tombstone, what would you think? Maybe their identity was caught up a little too much. My worth is not in what I owe. We sang that today. But what's your identity? Who are you? And what matters to you are some of the most fundamental and important questions that you'll ever ask or be asked in your life. And Jesus is having coffee with you right now, asking you, who do you say that I am? And of course, Peter got the answer right. You're the Lord. You're the Messiah. And then if you turn that around and say, who are you? The right answer is it is my greatest privilege, Jesus, just to be your kid, to be a part of your family and to know that I can be with you forever. And so here as we read through this Gospel of Luke, what we're really doing is we're figuring out who he is, and through that process, figuring out who we are. And it's my privilege as a pastor to get to tell you the good news of the gospel, which is all those identities that you carry are beautiful and wonderful. You're Americans, you're Buckeyes, you Powell people, you Delaware people. I don't know who you are, you grandmas, you moms, you kiddos. One of my favorite identities is I'm a redhead, which means I'm better. Just tease it. I don't know. Like, we all have silly identities that we carry that give us so much worth. And actually, to be honest, the good news that I have for you is to tell you that all those things are good and beautiful and wonderful, and I'm so proud of you, and I love that. And all the identities that you have that you don't write and you don't tell people about, that you carry in shame, you should know that the good news of the gospel is those other ones that are one day going to let you down for not being good enough, and the ones that you carry that are shameful, you don't have to worry about that anymore. In God's kingdom, you have infinite worth, and you're his child. He said that the Son of Man is going to be rejected, that he must suffer, that he must die, that he must be rejected. He didn't say he should or he would or he could or he might or he's kind of going to go that way. Why does it say the word must? It's hard to reckon with the idea that Jesus chose to die. He's the Messiah, but what kind of Messiah? He chose to be the kind of Messiah that was going to give everything away. Why did he choose to do it that way? It's because he wanted to show you how much you're worth. He wanted to show you how much he was willing to go, like my buddy to Iraq. There was no distance he wouldn't go to be able to adopt you into his family and give you the identity that you desire and you want in the deepest recesses of your heart, is to know you have a family and a God who loves you infinitely, and therefore there is no room you could ever walk in anymore that you don't belong. Because you're his kid and he loves you, and you can always be welcome home with him. Will you bow your heads and pray with me? Lord, we give you thanks for this amazing part of the Scriptures where you turned to your friends and asked, who do you say that I am? Forgive us for the ways that we sometimes overinflate identities that we have as a way to give us pride and value when our real value should be found in something else. For the identities that we carry around as addicts or as failures or as dropouts or as just messy people, God, would you remind us that those aren't our identities, but just parts of our story that are all held within the larger picture of us just being your kids who are growing up in you and who you love and were willing to die for. We praise you and thank you in Jesus' name, and all God's people said, amen.